Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thomas Castro. I'm the Curator of Graphic Design here at the Stedelijk, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all back to another edition of the Wim Crouwel Lectures. The Wim Crouwel Lectures have been organized jointly by the Wim Crouwel Institute and the Stedelijk Museum since 2014. This collaboration is very important to us, and I'm happy to share that earlier this year, we renewed our commitment to continue working together in the years ahead. So that's really good news. It means a lot to us that we can keep creating a platform where designers, students, makers, researchers, and the wider public can come together to reflect on the legacy of Wim Crouwel and inspire and explore new directions in graphic design as a medium for social and cultural activism and engagement. We have a fantastic program ahead of us, so I won't keep you long. I'd like to introduce Astrid Forsemans, who is the co-chair of the Wim Crouwel Institute, and she will be your MC tonight and guide you through the whole event tonight. So enjoy.
Thank you, Thomas. Can you hear me? Yes, I think so. Well, also on behalf of the Wim Crouwel Institute, as Thomas said, I'm the co-chair together with Rob Huisman. A very warm welcome to all of you. And a special warm welcome to the Crouwel family, to Judith Cahen. And maybe also we should start here, because today is the 21st of November, and it's the day of birth of Wim Crouwel. So it's also a beautiful parallel moment that we have this Wim Crouwel lecture on his birthday. So we are happy to be able to share this moment with you. Thank you very much. Just a short word on the Wim Crouwel Institute, and then I'll introduce Lilet Breddels to you. The Wim Crouwel Institute came from the NAGO. The NAGO was a sort of organization to gather, collect, inventorize archives of graphic designers. And at the beginning of the 2010s, that stopped because of a subsidy that stopped. Many subsidies stopped at that moment because of a sort of new political wind at that time. But a couple of people thought, well, it's a pity that this concentration on graphic design is not there anymore, and then they started the Wim Crouwel Institute. So it came from the heritage of graphic design, but by now it's an institute that does a lot more. We do, for instance, this Wim Crouwel Lecture, but we also do It's All Graphic in the Pakhuis de Zwijger. And also there's a lot of research going on. We installed a professorship at the University of Amsterdam. There are 2 lectors, it's called in Dutch. It's 2 sort of research teachers, professors, also at the University of Amsterdam. And what we want is that graphic design can be seen, of course, it's a way to look at it. What does the profession mean? What does it mean for the professional community itself? But what we find really important is how does graphic design constitute society, and also the other way around. How does society influence graphic design? How do these intersections work? This is also a good bridge to this day today, because of course graphic design is, I'm not a graphic designer, but maybe I'm explaining the obvious, but graphic design is not just about commas and exclamation marks and how you make a page or how you work with text and image, but it's also very much on visual representation or visual presentation of certain material. And this visual representation, that's of course today what links us to this lecture, because when we look around us, there's so much going on in the world where this visual presentation or representation is forming our worlds. It's how we look at Gaza, it's how we look at Ukraine, it's how we look at many of the wars around us. And not just that, I think the omnipresence of graphic design is so obvious that we also think that's the whole point. Graphic design is not just there for graphic designers, but it's for researchers, educators, and for a sort of general audience that we are aware of what graphic design is doing. And that's the reason why we organize all these different moments, events, and this, I think, this important once-a-year lecture together with the Stedelijk Museum. Thank you very much to the Stedelijk Museum. When we were thinking about this moment, we thought, yeah, it should be about what's happening now in the world. And then one of our board members said, yeah, maybe we should ask Lilet, because Lilet is a person Lilet Breddels, who is connected to what is happening in Ukraine right now. And so we asked Lilet, okay, you can talk a little bit about what you're doing, but it would be good if we could invite somebody who is directly involved in the war in Ukraine and what the visual representation or propaganda or whatever, however you can call it, how that can be analyzed or how we can reflect on that. So Lilet came up with Vasyl Cherepanyn, I hope I pronounce it correctly. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to introduce Lilet shortly to you. Lilet will talk a little bit about her background and her link to Ukraine, and Lilet will then introduce Vasyl. After that we'll do a Q&A. So also, if you're listening and you think, oh, but this is really an important issue that I want to know more about, memorize it, and we can use that for the Q&A. And then I hope we can have a drink together in the Café Sandberg down at the Stedelijk Museum. So just a short introduction to Lilet Breddels. Lilet, since a long, long time, is director of Archis. Archis is an organization that puts architecture and public space, the space where we're all living in, on the agenda, and then linking it also to political, economical, cultural issues. Since a long, long time, they are also publishing a magazine. It used to be called Archis, but since also 20 years, or maybe even longer, it's called Volume. It's by now a bi-monthly magazine published in collaboration with het Nieuwe Instituut in Rotterdam. What I understood is that Archis set up a program in 2010, so 15 years ago, and the program was called Architecture and Peace. I'm sure that Lilet will tell a little bit more about it. That's also the link to what's happening now. Lilet was invited to be part of Roskvit. Again, I hope I pronounce it correctly. Roskvit is, in fact, a Ukrainian organization with Ukrainian architects and Ukrainian cultural makers. And they are thinking already on how to rebuild Ukraine when the war is over, and how can we be prepared for that, not just literally in how can we rebuild, but also what sort of systems should we think of, how can we do that. Lilet also taught at KU Leuven, Katholieke Universiteit Leuven, with that same theme, architecture and peace. And in that, I think with Roskvit, she met Vasyl, I think at a forum or something, but it's also something that you can talk about. And I'm very happy that we can, and I'm honestly, sincerely happy that Lilet and Vasyl can talk about this situation, because we're all also at this very moment, we're a little bit lame. There's a lot happening and we don't know how to react to that. So it's really good that we have two people who can give that insight from a perspective that is very close to the actual situation right now. I want to give the floor to Lilet. Thank you.
this work higher? Or it's good like this? Should it louder? Yeah? I think so. Oh, loud. Thank you, Astrid. Thanks a lot, the whole foundation, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. And of course, it's a pleasure always if somebody asks you, do you know somebody who can give a lecture? Because you can think of all the people that you know who could be interesting for this. Who do I know that I can invite, basically? And I immediately actually thought about you, Vasyl. It wasn't a long thought. Because I thought you would be perfect to give this lecture in this context and in this time. And I think, and you already sketched it, we are here together for a reason, and that is because we share a lot. And I think what we share is that we look beyond. And you were describing that the Wim Crouwel Foundation is looking beyond design, like graphic design in this case. The Stedelijk Museum and Vasyl are looking beyond art and design in general, like what is behind it, how can you look beyond it? And me and Archis and Volume are looking beyond architecture and the role of architecture in society. So we're all crossing traditional boundaries of disciplines. And looking into, let's say, societal meaning for all those disciplines, like how do we actually engage with the world. The first time that Vasyl and I met was in 2014, a kind of pivotal moment in time, especially for Ukraine, of course, the time when Russia invaded Crimea. He was presenting in The Hague, in Stroom, a program called Hybrid Peace. Hybrid peace. Let's think about that. We were at the same time at Archis Volume also invited at Stroom for an exhibition that was traveling around, which indeed was called Architecture of Peace, as our project is called, as Astrid already said. And now in this moment, we come here all together at a time that we all know. We don't know yet if it's a pivotal time, but at least it's a poignant time for Ukraine, for Europe, for the world, I would say. So it is a quite, yeah, it feels light and heavy at the same time, and it feels also as this possibility of thinking together with all of you to look beyond and to look indeed for a possibility to act, a possibility of engagement, a possibility to work beyond. There is a second time that we met, and that was when we were invited together at the Documenta Foundation in Kassel. And then we were invited to talk about the role of institutions and their engagement or not engagement, what kind of position they should take in difficult times, and when there were times of protest, and when there were times of societal upheaval, how to respond to that. And that was actually the first time that we really worked closely together, or worked, we didn't work, but met each other more in depth, let's say. And we aligned very quickly, and we aligned in this conviction, actually, that cultural institutions should do that, and that this whole notion of a cultural institution being neutral, I don't believe in it, I think you don't, and I think you will take more about that later on. It's very important to take a stand, it's very important to have a position and to give a room also, to be engaged and give a room for debate, give a room for talks, and help actually with art and culture to reimagine the future. This reimagining, that is also indeed what we hope to do with Roskvit, Urban Coalition for Ukraine. So it's a foundation or an NGO actually created in Kyiv, I would say very fast, like two months after the full-scale invasion in 2022. Immediately, a group of people came together. It's called a coalition, so there are in total 100+ members looking for the future of Ukraine, actually reimagining that. There is also a core team of about 20 people, urbanists, sociologists, sometimes socialists, maybe, I don't know, all of them, who rethink the future of Ukraine. A lot of urbanistic plans, strategies, in request, a lot of times from municipalities, Ukrainian municipality who ask for help to reimagine their city in the future, because I'm very impressed, let's say, by the energy in Ukraine of immediately start thinking about a future, start imagining like, what will my city be? And then not just like, how do I put the stones together again? Not at all. They really think about, how do I get the people back? How do I make a city where people actually want to live? How do I get all those students who went abroad to study already before the full-scale invasion? How do I make my environment and our country so attractive that people will come back? And it is then a part, of course, from energy systems who have to be reconsidered, all kind of independencies on neighbors that have to be reconsidered. So this kind of energy is definitely what I also feel in the work of Vasyl. So the role of institutions and to be engaged, and that is actually something that I keep on using all the time, again and again, which was like the basic slogan, let's say, from the Prins Claus Fund, which is culture is a basic need. And I so fully agree with that and use it a lot of times. Maybe you don't even know, but I keep on using it. And I think that is something which is maybe your adagium. It's in the veins of Vasyl, that culture is a basic need, and you know that when you're living in war, when you know that when you're living under these kind of strains. Vasyl, to be some very practical things, he has a PhD in philosophy from Kyiv Biennial University. He's teaching everywhere, teaching in Germany, in Austria, at our own Rijksacademy in Amsterdam already for a very long time. So it's not recent, it's very long. He is, as you could have seen on the screen, he is also the director of I have to say this right, because I say institute, but it's not right, the Visual Culture Research Center in Kyiv. And from this visual research, he will tell a lot about, I hope, actually, I don't know exactly what you will tell in a minute. What I really admire is the relentless energy you give to your projects, and you curated shows. He is also director of the Kyiv Biennial, and extremely recently, was already just after we invited him here, it was announced that he is also now the curator of the Berlin Biennial in 2027, no? Yeah. So that's really cool, really nice. In those biennials you give indeed perspective. You always give a perspective on the future. So never stay, it's informed by the past and informed a lot on what's happening in the world, but you always keep an eye on how to activate people and how to look into this future. And I think that is something which gives energy to other people as well. And it's very hard to keep this energy when you're working in situations like you do and with people who are working in, or are ingrained in those situations. But you managed to do so, and I think, yeah, it's one let's paraphrase another person, and that is the deputy ambassador in Kyiv, a very wise woman. She says, when people ask her, like people in a room like this, like, yeah, but it's so yeah, you said you get like paralyzed or something, or apathic. What can you do? I mean, I want to act, what can you do? And she said, well, you can do a lot of things, actually. You can inform yourself, you can read about the situation, you can really get to know about the situation, and then you can tell about it, you can debate, you can talk to your friends, you can keep it on an agenda, even if it's an agenda around you. And then the last thing is that you can listen. Listen to the stories that are from that reason. So I suggest that we start doing that now and listen to Vasyl Cherepanyn.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's for this super kind introduction. It's indeed my great pleasure and honor to be here. Let me first of all express my personal, political, and institutional gratitude to the Wim Crouwel Institute for this kindest invitation. I appreciate it really sincerely a lot, to Stedelijk, to Lilet, to Astrid. I'm really very grateful to be here. And as my talk is titled Staring into the Dark, Visual Culture in Times of War, I think Lilet and Astrid set it, the framework, quite precisely. Because as I'm myself also not a specialist in graphic design in particular, though I think the question what and how design might mean and look like today is really an ontological question, I believe. So therefore, I will be rather referring to design in a literal, sometimes even etymological, existential, political, visual sense, using it as a political and visual practice at the same time. What it really stands for, meaning to leaving a mark, shaping something, societally, but also individually, politically. I think this is one of the crucial stakes of today, because basically this is not just by occasion that visuality and politics so much overlaps, since actually the very inception of those ideas that we know as politics and visual image today, particularly from the ancient Greek times, when those things were respectively invented in the form of democracy and in the form of mimesis. They both are very much dealing with their representation, which, as we very well know, in the current populist times is undergoing a harsh crisis. So in this sense, both politics and both any type of image making in a broad sense and visuality have been always very busy to design, to shape, to fashion, to form a particular society to fit to some idea, to some ethos. And especially today, when we basically feel very much ourselves how the conditions of the political reaction, violence, extreme violence like wars and right-wing populism are harshly challenging the very modus operandi of our cultural or educational, for that matter, realm. And I decided to, typically I don't use any images during my talks because I treat them with respect, coming from the visual culture, so I don't like to illustrate my or someone's thinking. But I decided to show this picture, especially today, as by a strange coincidence, somehow that today is not only the birthday of Wim Crouwel himself, but also today is basically the 21st of November is the first day of all the Maidan revolutions, Euro revolutions, that have been taking place in Ukraine in the 21st century, both in 2004 and in 2013, the one which is known internationally as a Euro revolution, and rightly so. But this picture was taken not on the first, but quite the opposite, on the very last day of the Maidan revolution. And I somehow decided to rely on it, or refer to it rather, trying to emphasize, and so that we can vividly indeed see the direction and the price of the demand of a new, just and expanded Europe by an emancipative movement in a particular country, so that we basically see the square occupation movement, which was totally burned down, turning into a kind of a black square, even in a Malevich or suprematist, I would say, sense. So somehow, my question more fundamentally is, but what do we actually see, trying to see through the dark? What do we see when we try to understand, when we look at this kind of a blackboard, right? When the land itself is a black earth, right? The other notion which is so crucial for Ukrainian politics and history. And it's, I think it also very much overlaps with the visual as well as with the political as such, because Maidan, which was of course part of this global wave of square occupation movements, which some 12, 15 years ago was undergoing through different contexts. But what is especially, I think, also language-wise important, that the word Maidan, which is a word of a Turkish origin, but in Ukrainian it means the square as such. But it also is the name of the square, because it's called Maidan Square, but at the same time it became the name of the political emancipative movement. So you basically have in one place, one place in a way indicates locus, topos, and spatium. So you have a literal, physical dimension, you have a symbolical dimension, and you have a political dimension. And this is a system of coordinates that we somehow are situated and we are materialized in that. It's also very crucial that the movement is urban, that it has a physical space, agora, in the city, that is reclaimed by citizens for emancipative purposes. So it's also very much about corporeal, about body politics, without which any truly emancipative politics wouldn't be simply possible. But at the same time, I think a bigger, and actually somehow it even defines why we are all able to be here even at the moment, because in a way it also raises quite a strange, quite an important question. How strange is it that suddenly, because this photo as the last day, as Lilet mentioned, or made on the last day of the Maidan, and this is exactly the same day where the Russia's occupational war against Ukraine began. And it's really a kind of a question which tackles the very heart of the current, not just Ukrainian, but unfortunately, very unfortunately really, because if it were just Ukraine, it would be much easier. But this is unfortunately about the pan-European predicament. How come that we have revolution and war in the same time package? Yeah, it's a really very interesting kind of ontological question of space in time. Why do we, which is kind of historically proven, right? Because both notions are very important for European historical, obviously, developments. But at the same time, it's not by chance, not by occasion, that these two overlap at certain point. Because it also shows that this war that is still ongoing and which is unbelievably brutal and catastrophic while we speak, literally, that this war is of a counter-revolutionary nature, because the regime which we are dealing with, unfortunately, has a revolutionary problem for which revolution as an idea is the biggest nightmare, the worst nightmare. But it also shows something much more important in my view, that it's not by chance that it was called Euromaidan, right? It's because this Ukrainian movement was very much international, not only being part of these square occupation movements around the globe, but also because it was aimed exactly at Europe. Right? It somehow demonstrated that Europe, that what we call united Europe, is indeed a very radical idea. It's a revolutionary idea that Europe is not just some metaphysical cultural resort, but it is very stricto sensu, from a point of view of political pragmatism. It shows something very crucial, that basically what we call united Europe is based on a radical premise that this is the most positive way out from imperialism. This is the best way out for what is now, as another buzzword, especially in the art realm, decolonization, right? That when empires collapse, this is the best way out, that somehow we found ourselves, or rather you, Ukraine not yet, that with the collapse of empires, the united Europe is the way out. And that is exactly, without this, we wouldn't be able to be here actually together. And this is exactly why this war is an anti-European war, right? It is aimed at disrupting the very premise of why Europe stays united. And over the last years, especially during the full-scale invasion since 2022, pretty often from different colleagues, but also journalists, I myself, but also many of colleagues of mine from Ukraine have been asked quite a typical question: what are the effects of the ongoing catastrophic developments on arts? What are the effects for curators, for artists, for cultural practitioners being in war? There is a lot to unpack in that regard, and I will perhaps a bit later try to do so. But I also think that being in such a war also means that we are in a realm of not just radical politics, but a kind of a psychopolitics, right? And more internationally, especially now with the new US, it becomes more obvious. And so from that perspective, I also think that it's also very much important to, in a way, reverse this question and ask, but how it is for you, right? What effects do you have when you watch the war of someone else, right? I think this is really very, I myself included, I mean, I'm not out of the picture here, but I think that it will tell us much more about our institutional as well as cultural and artistic and image-making modus operandi nowadays. Because what does it do to our senses, to our perception, right? Because it's not just something very simple. When we are basically just observing an unbelievable destruction of a country next door, another European country, right? every day, and we are constantly bombarded. Also, I'm particularly using this military term, by this terrorist imagery, by the images of ruins, of destruction. What does it all do to how much do we agree with that, right? When we just watch it, even when we observe it, because observing the war means watching some imagery, right? And also this imagery produces certain type of imagination, of political imagination inside us. Because if it were to be over even tomorrow, we already got the problem at least till the end of this century, actually. Because this war, the way that it already happened, is just the biggest catastrophe for European democracy as such, and I think the European societies are just slowly coming to terms with its real implications, which actually will be haunting the whole continent in the decades to come. But I think that this observation, this process of watching the war, but also in the Middle East, as I'm just rather know much more about the context of my origin, I think it also puts the question of a visual image to a different level, to kind of a new level, because these war imagery are everywhere, right? They are of different kinds. They are present and circulating in various realms. In social media, they are pretty often disembodied. They are also very much propaganda influenced. They are used in arts. There are some critical images, some more engaged images that I will give my take on a bit later. But I think as a principle, and we already, in so many European countries, not in the East only, in the East of Europe, but also very much in the West, we are actually already feeling the real physical, political consequences of this observation, of this war observation. And this has actually, I would say, a very important visual dimension, which I would call a certain, what I would call Medusa effect. Right, because and that's in a way a kind of a maximum culmination that image as such can achieve. Because we are dealing here with, it's a bit of kind of Walter Benjamin sort of style of a narrative. I'm in particularly referring to his idea, as he put it, that Bild is die Dialektik im Stillstand. Yeah? So that the image is a kind of a frozen dialectics, that there is an internal dynamics, a kind of a dialectics which is going on inside the image. That image is basically kind of working, literally, but at the same time it has fundamentally has in its nature, it has its two-ness or doubleness. When being an object subjugated or subordinated to the viewer, it can achieve such a powerful state that it can make the viewer frozen. So being an object, becoming a subject. So it turns a viewer into an object. So it can have also emancipative, of course, consequences. And basically for proper liberal politics, we have to learn a lot from visual culture, particularly from these dialectics of imagery as such, I would say. But at the same time, it also has this frozen, terrorized effect. Right, when we observing the war are just becoming like frozen, so much terrorized that we cannot even move. And that's why we pretty often act out, which results in so many electoral outcomes, as we know, throughout Europe. And it has this visuality also has several kind of dimensions or levels, because first of all, it uses quite a terrorist aesthetics, so that aesthetics is part of this type of terror, of this brutality, of this violent visuality, not only in what this aesthetics depicts, but also how it is being formed. Right, but secondly, and this is, I think, very challenging, especially with regards to the artistic realm, to the institutional function in arts, that which is also very much mirrored in politics nowadays too. And this is a challenge that those occupants, those terrorists, or those who produce this violence physically, they basically operate with all the amount of an array of different media, which are also at disposal and typically used by institutions, by critical artists, and so on. So all of this instrumentarium and imaginarium is also at their disposal. So in a way, it also puts art in a quite risky position, because art finds itself in the situation when it's deprived of its modus of production, right? It cannot create any alternative, because all these media and all the instruments that typically artists have been using are now also being harshly used by those who produce violence physically. And for that matter, art in a way also becomes a kind of a disputed territory, the territory where how to propose an alternative when you are deprived of your means of production. And even more, that this war machinery is basically has become part of this current ongoing factory of dreams, of enjoyment, of this aesthetic machinery, right? So what we are dealing with in today's image making and perception of images is that it's a kind of a war entertainment complex, war visual complex. So almost all of and this is a dominating complex, right? It's not just about war, it's how we perceive politics, how we perceive our everyday life. These are the only lands, basically, that are allowed for us to be used. And that's why these processes are very much inscribed in the general, basically global nowadays, attack on the civil society as such, right, which is a trend almost in every country across continents, right? Today, all types of fascistoid, authoritarian, outright totalitarian powers are not even shy about their agenda and calling themselves this way. It's already even kind of beyond any ethics in terms of realpolitik. And of course, this has very harsh consequences for culture, how we perceive culture. So budget cuts are just one of the delayed consequences of this process, because those who produce violence physically, because we have to always, that it's not just about watching, right? That violence is exactly characterized by as a phenomenon that it has a direct impact on a physical body, be it a collective, institutional, or individual body. It is always in the area of fragile tactility, right? It's always direct impact, and those. I mean that those are trying to basically to close down the spaces which can potentially be alternative to them, especially when you are amid the warfare in such a extreme form of violence. It's also the question how in general to think or to produce or to make art, to make any images being in pain, in dying, in bleeding, and this is actually it's another kind of trajectory that we unfortunately embarked on, that because violence, especially the war violence, it always starts as a cancer, as a virus, but then it ends up as a desert. And we basically can observe in front of our eyes how this renewed savage form of war violence actually penetrates everything. How it destroys societies, how it deprives us from the democratic political procedures, how it corrodes all spheres of life without actually any end in sight. And this is the logic that we've been observing in politics as well as in visual culture in a broad sense, and also in the developments of our societies, that we are basically still going through this radical shift. Right, that revolutionary chance that was still kind of present and on the agenda for politics making around the globe some 12, 15 years ago, that it became substituted by war violence. Right, so it's not just that war happened; it happened because the emancipative chance was substituted by it, right? So you have this kind of a political lesson, if any, to be drawn, that unrealized revolutionary or emancipative chance, if you have this opportunity, can easily turn to its ideological opposite. Therefore, it's pretty often that's why that today we in our societies have this kind of an expanded understanding of politics. That's why pretty often we hear this type of question, what art can do to change politics, right? What artists can contribute to change our political agenda. I, in a way, somehow treat this as a symptom of time, because isn't it in this dialectical sort of from this dialectical perspective, isn't it a kind of a genuine diagnosis of the current international political predicament, that basically those in the political center, Democrats, liberals, whatever you call them, who over the last many years were even afraid to think or even pronounce the words regime change applied to authoritarian or totalitarian countries, nowadays they are undergoing the super harsh regime change in their home countries. It's a kind of like a total reversal, right, because of the unused opportunity. Therefore, political field is in a way left for technocrats, populists, and autocrats, and we pretty often ask about art, and politics in quote unquote is kind of outsourced to art, to soft territory, right? As if it's a kind of a substitute that can provide us with answers that people are looking for, but that professional politics cannot provide us with at the moment. So in a way, I would say that for the artistic realm itself, it's art's responsibility to reject this position, right? To deprive itself of of such a position, because it is not art that can affect any political change. It's quite the opposite, that art can actually articulate this more precisely, that in order to reinstate our social and political engagement and participation. It's not art, but it's rather the question what we can do, what can we do in order to make this political change that we desire, possible. So in this sense, those square occupation movements in their visual form as well are quite instructive and very important, especially if you compare this visuality with the current violent or terrorist one that I mentioned earlier. Because from a kind of a political semiological point of view, it's also very important that political subject, a collective political subject, is rooted not only physically in the city, but it also means that it gains subjectivity through becoming also an image. Right? One can say that actually the Maidan revolution was perhaps the most powerful image that Ukraine has ever produced in its history, and the most powerful in terms of its emancipation and in terms of its politicality. It was indeed a kind of a Gesamtkunstwerk. Right, that in a kind of a ready-made in Marcel Duchamp's sense, that because that's why it was very fruitful for all kinds of documentary filmmakers, for anyone. Anyone was an artist in a way, a kind of a utopian situation, because whatever you do there, you contribute to some aesthetical installation, aesthetical ongoing political installation, which had been constantly medialized during its development. So this potentiality and power of visual culture with the square occupation movements, this applies of course not to Ukraine only, was indeed what not just caught the attention, but it was a kind of a new type of relationship between the physical bodies and the images, and the images as such. Because it is always a revolutionary situation is always a situation when a certain amount of physical bodies decide to not to just observe the development on the screen, but when they in a way, so to say, step into the screen, when they feel in the image they observe with their own bodies, and then it becomes the desired outcome, right? When they are feeling in physically the image with the bodies. That's in a way how, in short, how we can say that how visual and political so much interrelate. So for that matter, I think, especially during the war, of course, it's undergone a drastical change, and it's in a way when we think of those times in between 2014 and 22, before the full-scale invasion, it in retrospect it looks like a certain kind of a renaissance in a way of arts and image making of so many types, and I'm really happy that there are people here in the audience who were also part of this with us in Kyiv in particular. But with the war challenge, something different comes to the forefront, right? Because the war also changes the way people make art, also in a very literal sense. Of course, now it's quite some years when this war has been ongoing, but in the first years it was rather what perhaps might be called quote, type of a fast art, that it's not so much representational, because people are trying to come to their senses, to test different strategies, also to change media, the media they used to use. But at the same time, I think what has indeed changed, and what might be also interesting for the foreign counterparts to learn from. First of all, I would mention here a very important social dimension of the cultural or artistic realm as such. This intention to unite, but in a very pragmatic sense. So Ukrainian artistic realm, for instance, but this also applies to other contexts, like in the Middle East, what I also learned, is very much characterized by the emergence of different types of collectives. Right, different emergency residencies, curatorial bodies, curatorial collectives, joint initiatives. So all those forms which are in a way referring to certain type of a joint communality, how to live together. And this also sort of live functions as a laboratory for the future, right? Because there will be nothing else what we used to have for the future, right? So, but this feature is also it's very political, right? Because I mean, methodologically speaking, collectivity is a main premise to start to make politics, right? In order to be political, you have to be collective in that or another way. But also it's very characteristical with regards to the Ukrainian cultural community, which got its collective subjectivity very much thanks to the revolutions. Then secondly, it's already like a cliche, of course, but it's pretty often told that this war is the most documented war ever, right, in history. And there is also a critical artistic response to that, which I would perhaps call active witnessing. In general, in such times of emergency, right, when the anthropology of image has been forced into emergency, into the war emergency, the concept of witness becomes crucial, not necessarily as a direct participant, but it's also the question of the witness is not only the question of a human being, it's also a question of a camera, for instance, of an observer, also of an unhuman type. Right, so because the technologies that have developed so fast, right, that most of the war imagery that we get and that we observe is coming either from a phone or from a drone. Right, so these are indeed, as they say, unhuman aerial vehicles pretty often, and it's also the question to which level this war will develop to become really unhuman, like speaking literally for that matter. But from the artistic point of view, this intention to document is really crucial, because it is exactly in this field that the cultural realm can do much more and can have much more long-lasting effects than just simply media, right, for which the world starts anew every morning. But for the cultural realm, this documentation strategy is very much based on the crucial notion of the evidence, which becomes really defining, especially in the wartime, in a legal, philosophical, in a military, in artistic sense, and this strategy to redefine or to define precisely what is evidence under such conditions, with potential also practical legal consequences, is indeed so much powerful, because this notion per se as such is based on the idea of the politics of truth, right? That evidence has to be trustworthy and it has to show truth. And this tendency is perhaps one of the those prescribed antidotes against the rise of fascism in the current times. And this is really important that it's taking place exactly in arts. And thirdly or fourthly, that what I would like to mention is the crucial concept of an archive, which became kind of defining both locally, nationally, but also very much internationally, because the interaction of those unhuman and human forces during the war, they produce a kind of a particular politics of gaze, right, which with its own dynamics, and it's also the question of power, to whom this or another gaze belongs, right? But being unhuman at the same time is the only way through this unhuman device to approach real corporeal body experience, even, for instance, with regards to people in the trenches and on the front lines. But as for the archive, of course, especially fighting or being in the fight or amid the existential, basically, war, which intends to deprive you from your identity, archive becomes, in a more general sense, the cultural legacy becomes also a battleground. So that's why there have been many attempts and intentions to rescue this legacy. But at the same time, let's not be blinded by this past, which functions here as indeed a kind of a Bildschirm, like a visual curtain that prevents us from putting the real question with regards to archive, which is the question of the future. And this is a very scary, actually, question. That's why pretty often we kind of avoid to tackle that, because the war itself is an ongoing archive production, right? It's also the question, by the way, the same with images, with data, as the same as with the land, with what they call today rare earth minerals, which is also the question of extractivism. Who is using this archive while being in creation? Mostly, right? What kind of companies are learning, what kind of mechanisms are learning from the ongoing archive, just really alive in front of our eyes. So that's why it's a question of the future, in the sense that this is what is really at stake, that the archive, not by the way by chance, literally derives from arche, which is power, which is government, right? Which is kind of origin or government, because this is exactly the question of the question of power. We now only observe some developments, some possible directions, but the main question, and this is what is really at stake of this war, why it's so crucial for Europe foremost, what type of power will be established internationally as its outcome, which is also the question, what type of power will be ruling and designing the everyday life of our societies till the end of this century. Because this is exactly what this war, volens nolens, defines. So therefore, I think, to wrap it up, I think what is really important in the cultural realm nowadays, to follow what might be called prefigurative politics, right? to work on the future ahead already today, trying to outline and to shape, to design possible and desired societies that we expect to come, engaging in this social change through image, through word, through action, then that meaning that planting kind of the seeds of the future into the soil of today. It's of course very long-lasting, very exhausting task, but that's the only way for the artistic and cultural realm, as for me, in order to go through the dark hour of today, in which unfortunately its darkest moment is yet to come. Thank you so much for your attention.
Hello, we have about 10 to 15 minutes to do some questions, so I can walk around and give you the mic if you want to answer or ask a question.
Vasyl, thank you so much for your lecture. I was wondering, and you've been pointing it out a little bit, but you didn't go really in depth enough for me. I'm very curious if you want to elaborate on it, how the war affects you personally. I don't know if you live in Kiev or if you live somewhere else, but I'm curious how it affects you personally and also professionally. I mean, you're doing amazing things as a curator, but I can also imagine that the war is under your skin. So, yeah, curious if you want to answer that.
I don't know if everybody heard it properly, but the question is how the war affects Vasyl personally.
Yeah, shall we answer like this? Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for this question. I actually am wondering myself whether I know an answer, a proper answer, right? If I knew, perhaps I would be in a bit in a not so much vulnerable position, right? Answering it so directly. But I think. Because it is, of course, very much psychoanalytical question, right? Which requires another setting than this one, right? I would say, but I think it did take some time to understand, and still is in the process to understand what these losses are. I think to a certain extent, what I'm struggling with here, answering this really very important question, is that basically also what somehow I felt that the war functions as a certain type of a drug. That that you are not sure about what you feel, or that you pretty often what you think you feel is not what you really feel, and I think it has not only individual but actually a collective effect, right? So I would say that in general, and myself included, that people in Ukraine to a certain extent they even somehow didn't understand what happened. You know what I mean? That it's really, no one expected it to be so fundamental, such a level of destruction, right? So we don't know how deep it is actually. Because again, this is, and this is what I'm also trying through curating or through organizing different projects, perpetually in a way, to to show this different type of a kind of a vertical, so to say, dimension of this. Because again, in the media, we usually are busy with how the front line moves, with this type of, of course, I'm not a military expert, I don't want to play here kind of a small Clausewitz or whoever, you know. So, but we are busy with this type of how it all, who occupies what, but basically psychologically, psychopolitically, but also ecologically, it has such a deep impact on all of us, right? Ukraine is now the most mined country in the world. What happens to the Black Sea is just anybody's guess, because, I mean, in order to demine it, it's just decades and decades ahead. I mean, it's so deep that it's very hard to even to touch it. It's like really so hot, so deep. And I think that we still are and will be occupying ourselves, like trying to get a sense of ourselves in this, what we become, what happened actually to us. I mean, especially if you have some personal, also friends or some colleagues who died and so on. So I think I cannot really answer this question directly. I rather would point that this kind of that it's like such an ongoing dimension that we don't see even we just see the beginning of this tunnel. I think it will be a long way to go through it.
Thank you for your lecture. It was very interesting, and thank you for answering that question, because that's quite hard, I guess. But I was wondering, because you're focusing on the visual culture within the situation of war, and if you look at, for example, what happened in America in the Vietnam War, they always say that the visual culture actually ended the war, because there were some sort of crucial images that were used by the media and therefore had a big impact on, the society in America. And also they said it, for example, from, I don't know if you know the Bang Bang Club, which was in South Africa. There was a sort of circle for photographers that had a lot of influence on the anti-apartheid movement. So I don't know how you see that. You didn't really mention that side of the visual culture. And do you think that, because we're in such a different time what media is concerned, because we're sort of bombarded with images, to use that term, do we even get touched by images in that way nowadays?
Yeah, thanks so much. I totally agree. I think we are indeed living in different times, also in terms of how we what we mean when we say media, right? Because there had been at the beginning of of the full-scale war. Remember that it was also kind of popular among some filmmakers or photographers who were saying like that they sort of were dreaming to make an image that would stop the war, whether it's possible. So, but to be honest, I think that it's rather out of despair than a kind of really working, because those cases that you mentioned, it was really kind of an era in the history of visual culture, so to say, when people were kind of amazed by the potential of a medium as such, right? So it was sort of grounded on this premise that this is something that like humanly controlled and can produce such an outcome. But today is totally different, just because we don't control these algorithms, right? Also, I mean, the way the most of the media are today being consumed, but also the other dimension that I would mention here is a kind of an ideological or existential dimension that it cannot, that visual culture here is rather realm working indeed for the future, but not for the immediate future, for the distant future, but not for the immediate future which is in front of us. And I doubt it can end the atrocities because there had been already quite many of this type of imagery, but they didn't work this way. And it's impossible also because of the nature, in a way, of this war, right? It also very much differs not just from the U.S. military incursions over the last decades, right? But also even what happened in the Balkans in the 90s after the crash of Yugoslavia, just because you know it's a different type of an existential challenge, because basically it's because the claim from the aggressor side is based on the idea that like Ukrainians don't exist, but since you are here, you have to be eliminated, right? It's like a pseudo-paradoxical, very stupid actually, but kind of fascist idea that you shouldn't, so you don't exist, but you can, so that's why you shouldn't, right? So it's like Freud's kettles story, right? I didn't take it, but somehow it was broken before. So, and that's why I don't think that any imagery can stop this type of a logic. Another type of intervention kind of needed in order to stop this logic in action, because I mean Milosevic was not saying to Croats that you don't exist, that you are all Serbs, right? I mean it was different stake. I mean those are some parallels perhaps, but the stakes are different from the very beginning, and so I think this root causes of the aggressor's thinking have to be challenged and destroyed in order to stop this.
Hi, Vasyl. Thank you so much for your very generous lecture. I had a question about the Kyiv Biennial and the transnational collaboration that you established, which is quite impressive, like how the Biennial has managed to mobilize so much international solidarity. And I was wondering, specifically in terms of visual culture and all of these different places, you've talked a lot about Europe as a whole, but then there's of course a lot of different sensitivities towards representing war crimes, and now you're entering the German context, and I'm really curious, like, if there's anything you could say or share about the different ways these different places and countries deal with representation of war. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for your kind appreciation. Yeah, indeed, it's. Structurally, just very shortly, briefly, from the very beginning, since its inception in 2015, the very idea of the Kyiv Biennial was kind of based on such a premise that that we start something every 2 years, so we like stick to this biannual logic, literally in a way, but at the same time we sort of expand that. We have something launching before the full-scale war, typically in Kyiv, and then it goes and continues elsewhere, both in Ukraine and abroad, until the next edition. So it was from the very beginning, it was this type of a perpetuum mobile sort of mechanism. Also, so we never do these touristic blockbuster shows, right? So we are literally working site-specifically, right? That's why it, in a way, answers your question with regards to many contexts of representation of whatever it can be, that we never come, so these partnerships and solidarity indeed is very much based, apart from sharing more or less the same political agenda, but it's also very much based on that it's a collective work. So each location is specific. We don't make touring exhibitions. So for each location, for each site is something unique, which is conceived together with the local context and with the local institution, which is kind to host or co-conceive it, and because we sort of local is a context, is a kind of a starting point for us. Of course, we have like a general framework of a particular edition, of that or another edition, but each part can be seen separately and perceived individually. Though, of course, if you add those parts to make a kind of a bigger Lego picture, then you will have a bigger one. But basically, it's very much locally and grounded. But at the same time, it's not only about representing war crimes. I also don't think that that any type of, if I may say so, this type of war porn, right? I think it's overproduced, and as well as, by the way, with the revolutionary porn, this it pretty often becomes kitsch very fast, and basically sometimes it's very funny to observe in white cube spaces how they represent what they think is political, but it's another question. Yeah, so it's not just about representing war crimes. I think there is always a kind of a resonance and interrelationship between those contexts where we work in and those concepts or intentions from the Kyiv Biennial core team or side. Yeah, so in this sense it also allows us to be, politically speaking, constantly visible, right? That it's always ongoing in different forms, but very much adjusted to the context. And I think, yeah, of course there are different challenges. You mentioned Germany in particular. Yeah, we were working last year in Berlin. I think, yeah, and just not to go very deep into that, I think it's very much, it very much really depends on the political self-awareness of a particular institution, whether the institution is conscious, whether it can answer the question why it is doing this. What are at the stakes here, and what do you want to achieve, right? Why you are doing this? So when the institution is clear on its own about this, then it becomes also easier and allows to avoid unnecessary conflictualities, which are of course very easy to provoke. But I think it's kind of a, yeah, it very much depends on the institution's ability to put this clearly for itself, I would say. Yeah, thanks.
Thomas, do we still have time for one question?
Last one. Last one. Better be a good one.
Thanks so much for your beautiful story and for being here. I was wondering, you just mentioned briefly the Palestine situation, which of course happens in parallel to this atrocity here. And I was wondering whether you, on your level, maybe talk and exchange ideas of how to start thinking about a future, since you're both like in shatters and to start thinking about where to go, what next steps to take.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in a way, it's a kind of a follow-up question from my perspective to what was asked just previously. We not just tackle this, we basically, of course, embraced this catastrophic reality in Gaza and Palestine, also institutionally. Basically, I would say that the last edition of the Kyiv Biennial we just finished a week and a half ago, which started at the beginning of October this year, taking place in a bunch of cities and institutions at different European cities. It was very much about this. In short, we kind of came up with the idea of proposing a sort of, also thinking about the future, proposing a kind of an alternative geography, so to say, trying to reroute the compass, if I may say so. It was based on the, we came up with a term called Middle East Europe, to which we included Central Europe, which is part of the European Union, post-Soviet Eastern Europe, which is not, like Ukraine, but also the Middle East and a bit of Mediterranean. So Middle East Europe as a kind of an extended, and we tried to analyze this geography and why it's so much marked by warfares and violence through the historical as well as contemporary analysis of imperialism and extractivism and colonialism as well as neocolonialism, right, which is exactly concentrated in this region. And the main exhibition, which is still ongoing, by the way, I invite you all, if you happen to be in Warsaw, at the new building of the Warsaw Museum of Modern Art. There is still ongoing till mid-January, our main exhibition of this edition, which is titled Near East, Far West, which is also kind of a play of words with regards to the region that we claim we all, I mean, in the east of Europe. So we are trying to treat this east of Europe in an expanded sense. So in this sense, of course, the Gaza war against Gaza and Palestine is also part of that, and it's very much represented almost in all the iterations that we had just this year, these 2 last months. Yeah, but thanks for that. Yeah, otherwise it would be, So for that matter, it's also very important for the Kyiv Biennial to stay really international. So it's Kyiv Biennial because it was conceived in Kyiv. I mean, also as a result of the Maidan Revolution in a way, but its aftermath. But it has been always international biennial, right? So we are not specialized in showing Ukrainian art or whatever, right? I mean, it's always also Ukrainian art, of course, but it's always an international and internationalist, politically speaking, effort. Yeah, thank you.
Is there a very, very urgent question? I think we'll need, can it be short? Okay.
Thank you. Staring into the dark, does the visual culture in these times also carry a bit of light?
It's a Hegelian question. Let's leave it for the bar.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vasyl. Thank you, Lilet. Thank you, Stedelijk Museum. And as Vasyl said, we can go downstairs in the Sandberg bar at the far right corner. They have made some space for us. So
thanks so much.
Thank you.